In the history of automobile racing, particularly with a U.S. connection, very few cars will hit the legendary status of the Shelby Cobra.
The Shelby Cobra program was amazingly successful. They became GT champions. They won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And I think he was the right person when Ford turned to Shelby to run their motorsports program.
The thing people have to remember is that Carroll Shelby never wanted to build street cars. He wanted to build race cars.
Shelby wanted to compete more internationally against the big guys like Ferrari and various others, and therefore more horsepower was needed, and then started widening the chassis and the body and planting the 427 big block engine for that particular reason.
They had the 427 engine, which probably in race trim made over 500 horsepower. So it really was dynamite on wheels.
They went with an all-new custom beefed-up frame, and on the competition versions, they added a lot of extra equipment, such as bigger fuel capacity, a different rear end, different brakes.
I always had a love for this type of cars because they're so pure, they're just radical. It's just an amazing engine with 4 wheels, no brakes, and, very difficult to drive.
So a full competition 427 Cobra, between the power to weight ratio and the unbelievable torque that engine created, it was destined to be a winner, and it was.
Carroll Shelby was a legend for being able to wave his magic wand and reach its high point with the competition versions of the 427 Cobra.
The history to this car is that Ford wanted to bring the international motorsport of Ford Motor Company to another level. And Fred Kramer, who ran the Ford Motorsports program at that day, reached out to Essex Wire. Essex Wire was the wiring harness manufacturer for Ford in the day, and Ford was Essex Wire's biggest client.
And he wanted to put together a team for Essex Wire to go out and compete in these national and international races. The first thing he did, he hired Skip Scott. He was a driver and he was a great businessman, and he helped to assemble the team that would be behind the Essex Wire 427 Cobra campaign. The thing about Skip Scott that a lot of people don't know is that he was an apprentice of Ken Miles.
The combination of Ken Miles' ability to drive a car and also to identify, while driving it, what it might need to take it to the highest level was a very rare talent that Carroll Shelby used to a very high degree. Essex Wire hired the best mechanics, the best drivers, and went out and literally dominated A production racing.
As a longtime member of the Shelby American Club, CSX 3009 is very familiar to me. That's the Essex Wire Cobra, maybe the crown jewel of all 427 competition Cobras.
SCCA road racing so popular here in the U.S. in the 1960s, where in the A production class, the Essex Wire 427 competition Cobra won the national championship, and then moving into the 1970s, repeated that both in 1973 and 1974, adding to the legend of this car.
It won a lot of races. It is said it won 60% of the races it competed in.
I personally have all the records to this car. Every race that it raced, this car has more victories than any other Cobra product ever.
So one of the reasons why the Essex Wire Cobra was such a stout performer wasn't just because it handled well and it was prepped and set up well and it had some of the top drivers. It also had horsepower, courtesy of the famed FE 427. That's an engine we're all familiar with, that Ford was successful in NASCAR racing, even at Le Mans, winning in 1966 and 1967. This particular example had aluminum cylinder heads and a very rare magnesium intake manifold.
3009 means that technically it's the 9th Cobra that was built when the 427s debuted. That is the production sequence. So the heritage of this car has never been in question. It is one of the original 427 competition Cobras.
The 1960s were a golden era of performance across the board, and that includes road racing. And this particular car represents one of the top cars of that era.
One of the significant factors about this car, it's a race car that raced for so long and yet never was totaled and never sustained serious damage during all those years.
The car was raced hard, but it was never crashed significantly. I mean, it had dents, but the chassis was never damaged. The substructure was never damaged. And the reason for that was because it was always in professional hands. The equipe that raced the car was always professionals. It's fully documented. Everything is known about this car because it was so famous. The history is fully known from day one to today, including myself having carried out that restoration. So the restoration took more than 5 years, and it was very, very difficult. It was extremely costly to bring the car to where it is today. The complication was that all the parts to this car were scattered all over the United States. So the just reunited chassis body unit was north of Concord in North California, while the other components, the engine, the bell housing, also the magnesium intake manifold, the magnesium wheels were super rare, were still in Newport, Rhode Island. We found this set of tires with a collector. They're new old stock original tires from 1965. The gearbox are found in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So all the parts were put together and shipped to Mike McCluskey in Torrance, California, who started the restoration. When we met for the first time, immediately realized how pedantic he is. I think I met the right guy because he's been working for Carroll Shelby in the day. He has more than 50 years experience working on these cars. We have a selection of, I would say, hundreds of photos to that car, which we then blew up to know exactly where the rivet was in that particular part. Each and every detail to the car was sourced. Each bolt, washer, nut, everything that was still intact to the car was prepared, was cleaned, was replated and put back on the car. So any of the visible parts to the car are exactly as the car came in 1965, either original parts or NOS parts that we were able to source. I found a specialist in Miami, Florida, to actually replicate the decals to the car that don't exist anymore. This is exactly how the car looked like, down to the very last millimeter of the stripe of the orange lining and also the color. I met Carroll Shelby, luckily before his passing, and he personally came over twice to Mike's shop to look at the car. He was very interested in the project, and that this guy from Germany came over to revive this very important car for him. He gave him very relevant tips in order to bring the car back to its original condition. Major project, the biggest one in my life.
Success on the racetrack, success on the show field. It has won a Best of award at the Shelby Convention. And just to let you know, the judges at the Shelby Convention are relentless.
It scored SAC Gold with the highest score ever, 695 points out of 700. It was the highest score ever on any Competition Cobra judged by the SAC.
So just being able to win any award at the convention is quite a thing, but to win a Best of, it tells you everything you need to know about the condition of this restoration. When I was a kid, I had posters of the Essex Wire Cobra on the wall of my bedroom. I had model kits and slot cars and things like that. And now I find myself able to stand right next to this car. And you don't get an opportunity to do that very many times in your lifetime.
We sold some of the best and most valuable Shelby Cobras, but once again, the bar has been raised. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that the Essex Wire Shelby Cobra Competition 427 is really the pinnacle.
There are going to be people walking around Kissimmee that are going to be there just to see and take pictures of that car. And the people who are going to be in a position to buy it, the bidders who may own this car at the end of the auction, it's an experience I'm sure that even they will have a hard time describing.